So, what has our journey been so far? Our journey, brothers and sisters, has been that we have started with first principles on the fitrah, to make us understand that every sphere of knowledge has assumptions that cannot be reduced any further, but are necessary in order for you to adopt, for you to progress in a particular sphere of knowledge. Everything has first principles and assumptions, including science, neuroscience, politics, philosophy, everything. Islam has its own first principle, which makes sense of ourselves and reality. That first principle is the fitrah, that we have an innate nature with a form of knowledge within this innate nature. That form of knowledge is based on two things. Number one, Allah is a reality and that He deserves praise or worship. But over time, the fitrah gets clouded. It gets clouded to prevent us from seeing the truth. So our job is to uncloud the fitrah to awaken the truth within. What can uncloud the fitrah? Rational arguments, experiences, revelation, and other things. But they don't become ends, they become means to awaken the truth within. And they have certain limits and levels. So this should give us intellectual and spiritual maturity to know how to address the human being in this context, which we discussed at length earlier. Then we spoke about self-evident truths. Like self-evident truths are true by default. They can change if challenged effectively. But if we accept something to be self-evidently true, it's true by default. Where someone challenges a self-evident truth, the onus of proof is on them. And the characteristics of the self-evident truth are that they are universal, they're untaught, they're natural and intuitive. The underlying idea of God's existence, a creator, prior causal activity, prior creative activity, that itself is a self-evident truth. So if someone challenges it, the onus of proof is on them, which gives us a stronger foundation and a confidence to address these realities. And that's why sometimes you don't have to start with that question. You could go straight to the fact that Allah deserves to be worshipped. And if the question arises, then you can address it by asking them for evidence to why they think God doesn't exist, or if you have a decent conversation and engagement, to provide evidence. Then we moved on by discussing life without God, the absurdity of life without the divine. Now, if you are a philosophical naturalist, which basically says that there is no supernatural, no divine, everything can be explained by physical processes. If that is the case, then you can't claim ultimate hope for ultimate justice, ultimate value, ultimate purpose, and ultimate meaningful happiness. Because we as a reality is fundamentally reduced to physical processes causally connected with one another, and those things are further reduced to electrons whizzing around. Now, this is not a direct rational argument per se, it's more of an existential argument, but it creates the fertile ground for the rest of the arguments that we're going to discuss to take root. 5 minutes for questions before I send you for wudu.
So my mother talks a lot about how younger people these days are getting confused about their religion.
Yes.
And like how they learn about other philosophies and how they sometimes get into atheism when they learn more about atheistic philosophers. And so she was wondering how you can learn about philosophy or pursue that kind of intellectual background without getting confused, or like what's the proper way to do it?
Good. So this is my advice. Because I did 2 postgrads in philosophy. I get asked this a lot. So I get asked, is philosophy haram? Of course it's not haram. But there is a understanding that there is aspects of philosophy that are blameworthy. So in our tradition, we have a tradition called the Kalam tradition. Now, regardless of what school of creed you follow, no one threw the baby out with the bathwater. Today's modern Muslim does, because they don't know what they're talking about. They don't read the classical books. They read translations of translations written by ideologues. Let's move those to the side for one moment. So, even Ibn Taymiyyah, who was a critic of certain manifestations of the Kalam tradition, praised other aspects of the Kalam tradition. So no one threw the baby out with the bathwater, okay? So we have to think of the Kalam tradition. The Kalam tradition has a blameworthy aspect and an aspect that should be used within its context. Like Al-Ghazali, for example, he said you should not use this for people who are okay. It's meant for the sick person. Yeah? So, and if used in the wrong way, it could make people spiritually sick. So here are the principles, and these principles are agreed, from my knowledge, across all the schools of creed, the Atharis, the Asha'ira, and the Maturidis. They agree with these principles concerning the Kalam, generally speaking. Number one, the thing that you talk about and you articulate needs to have premises, assumptions, first principles, foundations that can be found in the Quran and Sunnah. If it's not, then you can't do it. That's it. Simple as that. Yes, there's been a difference on the interpretation of those assumptions based on the Quran and Sunnah, but that's not my argument here. My argument here is conceptual, it's principled. For something to be sound, you can articulate it in a very smart, intellectual way, no problem, given you have the right audience, but it has to be based on Kitab and Sunnah, or inferred from Kitab and Sunnah. That's the first point. So, the main question I need to address now is, what's the advice of someone wanting to study philosophy? I have 4 pieces of advice that have to be adopted in order if someone wants to do this. Number 1, you have to have a basic grounding in Islamic Aqidah, in Islamic creed. If you don't, philosophy becomes haram on you, in my view. Yeah? So you have the basic understanding of Islamic creed. Number 2, you have to have a connection with mainstream Islamic scholars. If you're an autodidact, you're going to be in big trouble. You need to sit under the feet of ulama. You learn from ulama that which you could never learn from books. Okay? Number 3, you have a relatively decent connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which leads to my other point, that you know who Allah is to a certain degree. If you have those things in place, when you go and study philosophy, even to a high degree, your iman will be boosted. So I did this in my later life, right? I didn't do my postgraduate in my 20s, I did it in my 30s. And when I did it, I was like, oh my God. It was an iman boost. All I was thinking about is Allah's names and attributes. These people were so close yet so far. Yeah? But it has to be based on those things. Because if I went and studied on a postgrad level philosophy 10 years ago, I would have been completely lost now. So you have to have those things in place. That would be my advice, and Allah knows best. One more question. Yes, sir.
About implications of atheism that we talked about, it makes sense for somebody who thinks at a deeper level.
Yes.
But the majority of the people these days, they're just entertained, they're having fun, they're not concerned about any of these issues. So, like, what would be a strategy to, and that's vast majority of people you probably.
It's a very insightful question. See, the whole point of this is to get them to ask questions. And the way to do that sometimes, not giving them answers, is by merely asking them a question. Because wallahi, I think sometimes, look, the Quran doesn't give us all the answers directly. This is a fact. The Quran gives us the questions as well. It's as if Allah is teaching us, if you ask the right questions, it would inevitably lead to the right answer if you're sincere. So our job as Muslims is not always to give people answers. It's to literally get them to think. Even if you know an answer, if you know the person well enough and you're intellectually and spiritually mature, you won't give them the answer, because that might not help them. What may help them is if you get them to think, to teach them how to think. And the way to do that with people in the context that you're discussing is literally asking them the question and giving them some very basic thought experiments and scenarios. So yeah, that's the Dawah strategy. Get them to think, ask them the questions. Have those conversations with people. You're right, people don't have profound thinking. Well, get them to think. It doesn't have to be philosophical and very in-depth, but at least raise the question. And I'm telling you, it will plant a seed in the heart and mind, and they'll think about this very seriously. Yes, sir.
So my question is that some of the arguments really boils down to going back to Quran. For example, they use it like, okay, Richard Hawkins has said that in one of the, I think it was maybe Hassan, he said, if you believe in that the Prophet went on a flying horse, then something like that, then don't, I don't want to talk to you. Something like that.
Yeah, well, he's an idiot.
Yeah, so how do you, as some of the arguments, you have to go back to Quran. So how do you answer those?
Well, no, because his argument about the flying horse, he doesn't believe in the Quran. But he's saying, if you believe in such a proposition, he said, I shouldn't be speaking to you, it's irrational. What has he presumed? He has presumed that his current observations is enough for him to formulate conclusions about the world and reality. But it's a contradiction, because you could just say to him, what's so difficult to understand here? There is a flying horse. How is that irrational, even according to empiricism? Say he's an empiricist, that the sense world is the only way of knowing things. If you're intellectually honest, what you should say is, we haven't seen that for ourselves, so we suspend judgment. You can't belittle it. Because if you belittle it, you have stopped progress of knowledge. For example, imagine people before the 1950s, people laughed at the idea that there was information in the cell. Because before the 1950s, they thought the cell was just blobs of protoplasm. Yeah? Cytoplasm. If you said to them, you know what, there's an almost amazing sequence of a phenomenal biological code in the cell that looks like a double helix, they would laugh at you. If they laughed at you, right, they're the irrational ones, because if they follow empiricism truly, they should say, well, there may be a possibility that this can exist. So for him to come across like that, it's just rhetorical. It's not intellectual at all. Imagine we take a time machine back 100 years and we start talking to people about quantum physics, that there's things within the atom, right? And there's some bizarre happenings in the quantum world. They'll laugh at us, right? He's no different. He's the same primitive.
My follow-up question, why is it that always in these debates they put people like, I don't consider maybe Hassan should be interviewing him. I mean, it should be a person like you or somebody who's knowledgeable to answer. Why do they do that? And I find that most of the debates where the person that put against these people, they're not, they can't handle them. Yeah, it almost looks like they're more smarter than the guy who just believes.
Look, whatever the case may be, bro, don't base your faith on the intelligence of other people, because your faith will be changing every day. Alright? Base your faith on your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with your own arguments, with your own positions. If you base your faith on just the say-so of others all the time, or their intelligence, your faith will be fluctuating a few times a day. Yeah? And there are certain key principles that we'll learn in the next few days that will give you that grounding anyway. So, khair inshallah. And a lot of things you have to understand, that a lot of people, they have the wrong lenses in which they see Islamic discourse anyway. They have the wrong lenses. Because the issue of the flying horse, they assume, for example, it was a direct empirical reality. Yeah? Okay, we know it was real, but we don't know how it was real. Like, for example, there was one atheist Muslim. He was Muslim, I think he became an atheist. He said to me, I don't believe in Islam. One of the reasons is this hadith. There is a hadith that basically says that the sun prostrates to Allah, right? And I was like, so, what's the big deal here? He said, yeah, but the sun doesn't prostrate. Well, if you mean by prostrate, you need arms and a forehead, duh, of course the sun doesn't prostrate, yeah? But if you mean by prostrate that it obeys Allah, and in this case the sun obeys the laws that Allah has created, what's the problem? And he was a bit, okay. I said, exactly, you have put the wrong lenses in which to see this hadith. because you think this hadith has to be a scientific hadith. It's not. It talks about metaphysical reality. You see? So sometimes when some people approach the Quran and Sunnah, they have the wrong baggage. They have maybe an empirical paradigm, or they have scientism, which argues that the only way to find truth is through the scientific method, which is a ridiculous notion, right? And that's why sometimes when you understand first principles and assumptions, I don't know if you were here earlier this morning, but that's what we went through. It gives you the tools to go straight to, what's this person's assumption? And usually with these type of arguments, their assumption is, truth is what you could see. Truth is what you can directly or indirectly observe. And that, my friend, is fundamentally false. Yes, Sheikh.
So, Brother Hamza, on page number 15 of the course notebooks, you have under the activity and discussion an article linked to the 10 benefits of atheism. So I'm just wondering if you're going to, throughout this weekend, if you're going to answer those benefits of atheism, and especially, for example, happiness. Once I was delivering a lecture at Interfaith event, and one of the audience members asked me that the same question about happiness, and in Scandinavian countries that atheism is increasing, and at the same time Scandinavian countries are happy, so how are they correlated and things like that? And also, what do you think is the cause, the reason of atheism increasing in the world? And also, how can Muslims, masjids, organizations, what can they do to mitigate the rise of atheism amongst Muslims? So,
yeah, I can't answer those questions now, but we'll answer them after lunch in Dawah. You have activities in your booklet. You have to do this for your homework today. So one of the main reasons that we finish a little bit earlier today is so you do your homework. And we're going to address those activity sessions tomorrow and go through them as well. It's very important you do them because it helps you exercise the concepts. They've been designed so you exercise the concepts that we went through today. We went through 3 major foundational sessions today. So we're ready now for positive arguments, okay? And Sheikh, we're